The men in power demand, "By what authority are you doing this?" It's a public challenge, a showdown in the temple. But with one question about John the Baptist, Jesus backs them into a corner. If they answer honestly, they lose. If they lie, the crowd turns on them. So the guardians of Israel's truth say the unthinkable: we don't know. We're exploring Mark 11:27 to 33. Let's start with verses 27 and 28. And they came again to Jerusalem. And as he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him, and they said to him, "By what authority are you doing these things, or who gave you this authority to do them?" Before we dig into these verses, you may have noticed that we skipped verse 26. The oldest manuscripts don't include what we call verse 26, and the broad consensus is that it was added later to harmonize Mark's account with Matthew's. Back to verses 27 and 28. Mark tells us that Jesus and the 12 came again to Jerusalem. What we see in chapter 11 is that Jesus spends the days in Jerusalem and the nights in Bethany. So he's back in the city and back in the temple, and he's approached by a group of men, the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. This group forms the ruling council of the Jewish religion and oversees the temple compound and the practices that take place there. Remember, about 24 hours earlier, Jesus drove out the buyers and sellers and the money changers who had turned God's house of prayer into a den of robbers. Now the men in charge of the place approached Jesus with questions. First they ask, "By what authority are you doing these things?" The next word that Mark reports is or, not and, but or. Or who gave you this authority to do these things? That's very important because the or tells us that their second question isn't a continuation of the first, but offers a different explanation for what Jesus has been doing. What do I mean? I'm glad you asked. The first question applies if Jesus is acting on some authority outside of himself, sort of like a police officer executing a court-ordered warrant. The second question assumes that Jesus is acting on some intrinsic authority and asks him to identify who gave him that authority. In both questions, the issue is authority. The men in authority have witnessed an outsider come into the temple and act like he's in charge, and they didn't like it and want Jesus to justify his actions. It's like saying, "You're not one of us. Who do you think you are acting like this? What authority are you acting under? Do you have a warrant? Or if you're acting on your own authority, from whom did you get it?" On to verses 29 to 30. Jesus said to them, "I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? Answer me." What was the religious leader's issue? Authority. And when Jesus responded, what did he exercise? Authority. I'm going to ask you guys one question. You answer my question, and I'll answer yours. The implication being that if they either cannot or will not answer his question, he would not answer theirs. Notice that Jesus says, "Answer me," twice, without saying, "if you answer me." It's a stronger statement that way. It establishes conditions without using a conditional clause. Jesus has set the terms for this exchange. And what was his question? Was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? Was John the Baptist's ministry ordained by God from heaven, or was it just a human thing? Why would Jesus bring up John the Baptist? John had been wildly popular with the people. He was believed to be a prophet and had pointed to Jesus as the long-awaited Messiah. John's baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins was to prepare the people to receive the Messiah. If the temple rulers accept that John's ministry was based on heavenly authority, they would have to accept that John's testimony about Jesus was also heavenly. And if they accept that, they should already know by what authority Jesus cleansed the temple. The real issue embedded in Jesus' question was, in light of all they've seen, do the temple leaders believe that God is acting in the world through John and Jesus? Look at verses 31 and 32. And they discussed it with one another, saying, "If we say, 'From heaven,' he will say, 'Why then did you not believe him?' But shall we say, From man? They were afraid of the people, for they all held that John really was a prophet. The one word that comes to mind for me is calculating. They aren't concerned with the true or honest or righteous answer. They're concerned with how the answer will affect them. If we say yes, John's baptism was from heaven, we will expose our own hypocrisy. But if we say, no, it was of human origin, we'll incur the wrath of the people who believe John was a prophet. They are concerned with political fallout, public opinion, and preserving their own power, not the truth. On to verse 33. So they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." "We do not know" is not an expression of ignorance, it's an evasion. It's choosing a non-answer to avoid accountability. And who are they again? The chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. The religious authorities refuse to answer a religious question because they've prioritized political concerns. In an attempt to avoid accountability, they may have made themselves more accountable than they can imagine. Jesus tells them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. If you claim you don't know the answer to my question, I will not answer your question." It's interesting that by refusing to answer their question about authority, Jesus is again exercising authority in the temple. Their calculated answer showed them to be unserious and unworthy authorities, so Jesus feels no need to acquiesce to them. Let's wrap up with a little modern application. Let's think about what Mark has been doing for his readers with his account of Jesus so far. Just like the chief priests, scribes, and elders, Mark's readers have seen the stories of John the Baptist and Jesus unfold in his gospel. And Jesus' question to the temple leaders applies to Mark's readers, too. Is what you've seen heavenly ordained, or just human activities? Is this God at work in the world, or just people stuff? If it's heavenly, what will you do with that realization? Will you answer yes, or will you say, "We don't know"? Let me know what you think in the comments. Next time, we begin chapter 12, with the parable of the tenants, in direct response to the temple ruler's non-answer. I truly appreciate everyone who watches these videos. See you next time.